Good morning, girls. In the last class, we were discussing about the causes that led to the outbreak of the American Civil War. We talked about the difference in the economic structure of the northern and the southern states. So today we'll continue with the causes. Problem of slavery. Right from the time when America was colonized, thousands of slaves from Africa were captured and forced to work in the cotton, sugarcane, and tobacco plantations there. So we already learnt in the last class that there were 13 colonies under the rule of Britain. So right from that time, right from the time when American colonies were under British, they began to bring people from Africa as slaves. They forcefully brought slaves from Africa, and they were forced to work in the plantations. The Negro slaves were transported in the most miserable conditions to the American colonies, where they acted as cheap, convenient, and efficient tools for the development of the large growing plantations. So these Negro slaves means the black Africans, they had to be brought from Africa to America. So for this, the transportation means, the means of transportation which was used was very miserable one. Miserable means very bad or not very healthy. So the transportation means was very miserable one, because there was a small truck and these slaves, they were dumped into the truck, and it was very tightly packed. They were packed tight. There were no ventilations in the truck. They were not provided with proper food. So inside the truck, inside the vehicle, they did not have any good conditions. It was very bad condition inside the truck. So the condition of the means of transportation was very miserable one. And these slaves, these American Negro slaves which were brought into America, they were considered as the most appropriate and suitable tools which would help them in the development of the plantations, because these slaves, they were very cheap. Not much money had to be paid for the slaves for their work. So they could develop the plantations, large growing plantations, without much expense, because they did not have to pay much money to the slaves. The slaves had no rights and were not paid wages for their labor. So these rights, these slaves, they did not have any rights. There were no one to speak for their rights, and they were not paid wages. They were not given money properly. So the Americans, they felt that the Negro slaves were the best tools for the development of the plantations. They were made to live in unhygienic conditions, badly treated by their masters, and bought and sold like a commodity. So the places in which these slaves were made to live was very unhygienic. Unhygienic means unclean or unhealthy. So the place was very unhealthy. There were no proper sanitary facilities. They were not provided with proper food, drinking water, and there were no good toilets. There were no facilities. Facilities were there, and the condition of the place was very miserable. So they were just dumped into unclean places, and they were treated badly by their masters, by their owners, and also they were bought and sold like commodity. Commodity means goods or products. So just like how you buy some good or some product, and just like that, these slaves were also brought and they were sold like goods. There were no laws to protect the slaves from the harsh treatment given to them by their masters. So the slaves, they did not have any rights, and they did not have any laws to protect them from the treatment, from the cruel treatment which the masters gave them. The masters, the owners, they treated them very badly, and there was no law which would protect these slaves from their cruel treatment. The northern states, on the other hand, did not require slaves, as most of the people worked in factories as paid laborers. So this plantation, this is about the condition of slaves, and the slaves working in plantations is about the southern states, because in the southern states they were concentrated in agriculture, whereas in the northern states they were more into industries. So here in the industries, they did not require any slaves, because they had people who worked in the factories as paid laborers. They were paid for their work, and they worked in the factories. So here in the factories in the northern states, they did not require any slaves. Therefore, in 1804, slavery was abolished in the northern states and they became free states. Now, since the northern states, they were not in need of any slaves, they abolished slavery. Abolished means they stopped or they eliminated slavery, and the states abolished slavery in 1804 and they became free states. This was resented by the southern states, whose economy depended on slave labor. So this was disliked by the southern states, because in the southern states they were completely dependent on the slaves, because their growth, their development was all dependent on the slaves. And if slavery was abolished, then their economy would go down. They would not have economic development in their country, in their states. So this was the abolition of slavery in northern states was disliked by the southern states. So this was another reason for the civil war, for the outbreak of the civil war, because the northern states, they were against slavery, and the southern states, they wanted slavery. Next is the territorial expansion. Territorial expansion means expansion of the territories, or the expansion of the boundary of the state boundaries. With the expansion of industries in the USA, a large number of people from Britain, Germany and Ireland settled in the northern states. So in the northern states, industries began to grow rapidly, and because of this, people from other countries, countries like Britain, Germany and Ireland, they migrated to the northern states and they began to settle in the northern states. These settlers from Europe brought with them scientific knowledge and contributed in the industrial growth. So these settlers who came from other countries, they brought along with them scientific knowledge. They had their own knowledge about scientific things, and all these knowledge was contributed into the industries, and this led to the growth and development of the industries in the northern states. As the population of these colonies increased, efforts were made to explore the unexplored territories in the western regions of North America. So when the population increased, people from other countries, other European countries, they began to settle in North America, and this led to the increase in the population. So when population began to increase, they began to explore new places. They began to explore the places in the western region of the North America. So they began to explore, they began to discover the places which were not earlier discovered, and they began to discover new places, and especially in the western region of the North America. Many of these newly settled colonies were absorbed into the USA as new states. And these colonies, where the settlers came and settled, these new places, they were included into USA, into the United States, as new states of United States. So the places which were not earlier discovered were discovered because of the settlers settling in these colonies, and these colonies, they were included into America as new states. The Northerners wanted these new states to be free states, whereas the Southerners wished that these states should be slave states. So the people of North America, they wanted these new states to be declared as free states, whereas the people of South America, they wanted these states to be slave states. The Northerners argued that slavery would provide unfair competition for free migrants to the territories, whereas the slaveholders claimed that the Congress had no right to discriminate against them by preventing them from bringing their legal property, that is slaves, there. Now, according to the Northerners, they believed that slavery would be an unfair competition. Now the unfair competition, it is a word which is used in business. It's a business term, and this means it means a wrong business practice. So according to the people of Northern America, they believed that slavery was a wrong practice, a wrong business practiced against the migrants who came to these territories. Whereas in the opposite side, the people of South America, they were against this approach. They believed that the Congress did not have any right to stop them from bringing the slaves there. They called the slaves their legal property. They believed that slaves were their legal property, and the Congress did not have any right to stop them from bringing there. So the people of North America and South America, they had completely opposing opinions on slavery. A movement for the abolition of slavery began in the North and gained momentum around 1830. So there was a movement which worked for the abolition of, which worked to end or to eliminate slavery, started in North. It started in the North, and it began to move faster during the 1830s. Those who joined this movement were called abolitionists because they demanded the immediate abolition of slavery. The supporters of these movements were known as abolitionists because they put forward the demand for immediate abolition or immediate elimination of slavery. They strongly advocated the repeal of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, by which the runaway slaves had to be returned to their masters. Now there was an act which was known as the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. According to this act, the slaves who ran away had to be returned, had to be brought back to their masters. So the supporters of the slavery abolition movement were against this act. They wanted this act to be cancelled. They recommended for the cancellation of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Inspired by this act, Harriet Beecher Stowe, in her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, described the miserable condition of the slaves in America and roused people's anger against slavery. So there was a writer, Harriet Beecher Stowe. She described about the terrible condition, about the miserable condition of the slaves, of the American slaves, in her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. She described about the bad condition of the slaves, how they were badly treated in America, was described in her novel. And through this novel, through her writing, she was able to arouse people's anger against the slavery. People began to rise and protest against the slavery. So this is how territorial expansion led to the outbreak of the American Civil War. Today we discussed about two causes which led to the outbreak of the American Civil War, about problem of slavery and also territorial expansion. So we'll stop for today. Thank you, girls.